there's ability, there's ethnicity, there's so many other aspects to diversity that we'd really like to bring into the conversation at this stage. So thank you for joining us for the first of these 4 sessions. And here's the next slide. I get to introduce everybody. So I don't know, maybe you'll just like a little quick round of applause before I introduce everybody. Yay. Michelle, would you like to put your hand up? Michelle is a trans woman, an American, and for the last 2 years, host of Trans Positions on Melbourne's Joy 94.9 FM. It's fantastic that you do radio. Love Joy 94.9. She's raised awareness in the wider LGBTQI community. Michelle's a regular guest blogger and is often found consulting and contributed on trans policies for the agenda. I'll talk about that more later. I'm very interested to hear. She's also been an IT specialist with 20 years of experience in professional client services, so that's a significant amount of experience. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Adam has over 12 years of hands-on professional experience working on the web, including development, training, and consulting. Adam has provided accessibility advice and run accessible development workshops, as well as organized community accessibility events. No matter what hat he's wearing, Adam aims to create a more inclusive digital world. I'm glad that there are people like you. Kruti is a senior mobile developer at Isobar, Melbourne. She's passionate about increasing the number of women in the technology sector, hence she joined Code Like a Girl meetup and started her own YouTube channel, A Woman That Codes, to share her knowledge and experience. Lama is a tech marketing thought leader and listed among the top 250 influential women leaders to follow on social media. I don't follow you yet. I feel terrible. Her areas of expertise lay in the space where business, technology, and design intersect with digital PR and the marketing narrative. She's currently the Melbourne chair for United Nations Women Australia. She's a member of the CMO Global Council. What is CMO? Chief Marketing Officer of the Global Council, which as an advocate for tech diversity and inclusion. Brendan is a diversity advocate with a focus on raising awareness of mental health issues and the positives of diverse ways of thinking. That's another really interesting subject that I didn't talk about before. Of course, mental health is sort of more and more critical to broad discussions that we're having. So hearing about it here in tech is really interesting. So drawing on a broad academic and professional background, is working toward a career in helping organizations develop or align their economic, environmental, and social strategies. The triple bottom line. Finally, Gemma is a social entrepreneur having co-founded diverse city careers. She served on 2 not-for-profit boards within IT and established another not-for-profit organization for diversity and inclusion. In 2016, Gemma won the WIT? Women in Technology. Okay, cool. Entrepreneur of the Year Award.
Thank you.
A Tech Diversity Award in the Leaders Advertising category, and was a finalist in the 2015 ARN Women in ICT Awards in the Innovation category. I know we gave them a round of applause before, but let's just do it again. So we have 6 panelists. That's a lot of panelists. More than they have on Q&A typically, right? And we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to do the best that we can. We'll run till about 7:30, at which point we'll take questions from the audience for a few minutes, and then I think what everyone really came to do is to mingle, so we'll definitely leave a little bit of time for people to, gather around and ask questions and hopefully develop a discussion. Hopefully, the idea is that everyone takes 1 or 2 sort of new, or maybe more than 1 or 2, insights that they have learned here and takes them out to wherever you do your own work, and we want to spread it that way. So really looking forward to the conversation tonight, and again, thank you all for coming so much. Just kidding. So let's go back to this one for now. That's not in any of your eyes or anything. It's okay, everyone's comfortable? Okay, cool. All right, well, without further ado, I don't know, who gets the first question? Well, I'm just going to go in the order that I've written them down, which was in no particular order. Michelle. So I want to hear, establishing a bit of historical context, what was happening in your life personally when the diversity conversation sort of became personally meaningful for you? What was going on in your life? What were you thinking?
Look, probably about 4 years ago when I came out. Up until that point, I had been, a heterosexual, white cisgendered male in a tech industry. I had done everything from working in the field, server support, laptop support, desktop support, dealing with clients directly. But when I had finally come out, I was going through some personal things within my life at the time. I started going through divorce, and I needed to kind of figure things out for myself. I was working for one of the big four, and as I was sitting there at my job trying to decide whether I was coming out or what I was doing, when I was going through transition, I had colleagues come back from lunch. And mind you, here I am going through counseling, already in the topic of doing hormone blockers in the whole process, and they're coming into the office going, I just saw two faggots kissing on the street, it's fucking disgusting. And I'm sitting there going, I can't even raise this with my boss. Everybody who was above me was pretty much a very straight white men. Nobody in the office had, there was on the internal internet, there was a forum for anybody who would identify as LGBT, but anybody who was LGBT actually didn't come out. They actually were hiding themselves as well internally. And this is also one of the companies that was on the top 100 of Pride and Diversity as well, which absolutely astounded me. I decided to take a career break and stepped away and started working in a salon to have a bit of a change. I thought, I need to kind of find somewhere that's probably a bit more accepting as me as a woman. And mind you, this was one of my best friends. This is somebody who was actually my maid of honor at my wedding at that time, 12 years ago, at that point. And I was going through changes, and she said to me, look, I'm happy with people accepting you as gay, but I can see why your wife is so pissed off and you wants nothing to do with you. You don't even look the same. And she goes, no one's ever going to accept you as a woman. People will probably accept you as a gay man. I'm like, okay. So even one of my best friends who I'm working with doesn't accept me. I started looking for a job. I'm going out, and I actually started detransitioning to even find a job because I was told by an IT recruiter that, look, Michelle, we have trouble placing women, and I'm going to be frank with you. We're only going to be looking for white men under 40. Being transgender, you can forget it. Right. I had companies who then came to me, who I went to another recruiter, saying, look, at that time it was Daniel. Daniel's come into us, but we've Googled Daniel. And we can tell something's wrong with Daniel, and something's changing, and we realized Daniel's transgender. And our advice to Daniel is, being transgender is not a cultural fit within our organization, and they need to either continue their transition and come back, or stop transition. Right. So I actually became unemployed, started working as a landscape gardener, way totally away from what I was doing as IT. And I was fixing just laptops on the side just for cash. On Centerlink, doing landscape gardening, actually putting back on the weight and muscle I'd already started losing. Eventually went back into a corporate environment, again, another company who was on the top list of diverse companies, and then hit tokenism. I was brought in for a manager's, basically, diversity points for their KVAs, or whatever the hell each company has. And then once they got their points, I was stuck on another floor and was told, look, you don't have a job after this particular date, so whatever you need to do to find a job, you go do that. And you just come back when you're ready. And just tell us when you're going to go. I tried to approach that manager who I had assumed was friends, and next thing you know, they were basically ghosting me and staying away. And it really was blowing my mind. I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. And in the meantime, I was actually even interacting with people amongst male friends in certain spaces. And somebody was asking advice about something with their laptop, and they were talking to one of their buddies. And I said, oh, I've actually dealt with that. I actually went and did this before, and blah, 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 blah. He looked back to him and said, well, what about blah, blah? And basically asked the question again to him. I'm going, wait a minute, I've got 20 fucking years of this. I said, I've got a background in this. I mean, this person knows whatever. And I'm going, how did all of a sudden I lose a voice in all of this? So I then started talking further to most organizations and found that most companies were so worried about the gender equality, which is completely valid. I mean, we need to have gender equality in everything we're doing. I'm seeing that you see the percentage differences between men and women in this industry. But when I came in, I was brought in as a frontline person, underemployed, on a contract that's been extended several times, and it just was completely ridiculous. And so from there, that's when I started my company going, I'm tired of dealing with recruiters. I want to go straight to the front line of an organization and find out what you're actually doing. How are you training your managers? And for me, that's where the big tipping point was when all of a sudden I couldn't find a job because of just being transgender. And recruiters actually saying what they've said to me. And who am I? Being completely unemployed, no income. What am I going to do soon? With what money? So from there, it was basically pick my gear up and let's actually build something.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm not surprised that I saw a couple of people shaking their heads kind of in disgust at the events that took place. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to nutshell it as best I can as
Yeah,
well
you
in the
did a good job.
situation.
You did a good job. And I mean, that actually is illustrative of a couple of points that you actually explicitly touched, which is, obviously one of them is that there's a very strong focus on the gender divide, and of course there's far more in terms of diversity than just that. And I think that if we're committed to sort of like universal emancipation, then it bears us taking responsibility for sort of expanding the discussion, which is coming to another point. But I feel like this was a really good question, and I want to ask it of one more person. So I'm hoping that Adam, you can tell us a little bit about. So just to ask the question again, what's happening in your life when the diversity conversation in tech in particular really kind of gripped you and sort of propelled you eventually here to this panel?
Yep. So I think I just finished uni and I was looking for work at that point, and it was one of my either the university lecturers or the careers people at the uni who said, there are recruitment agencies for people with disabilities, and you go to one of those and they'll help you with a job. And I kind of sat back and went, yeah, but what's wrong with all the other recruitment agencies? Just because I've got a disability doesn't mean that I need a special form of recruitment agency that I need to go through. So ignored that advice and went to a standard recruiter, and a couple months later ended up with a job. So it was, I guess, kind of lucky at that point as well, because the recruiter knew what I wanted in terms of not being treated any differently. So got put forward to roles that anybody else would, and the disability became irrelevant, and found an organisation that also didn't care. So it worked out well. And that was 2008, I think, so a while ago now.
I think it's interesting that you both mentioned your experiences with recruiters. So were those sort of agency recruiters, or were they internal ones?
Mine were most of the main industry ones that were out there. But I had actually pushing me back to disability recruiters, because being transgender is still part of the mental health. Technically according to health industries, I have a mental health issue. So where we have Idaho Day, or Hobbit Day that's coming up, recognize that the gays have come off of the mental health register, but being transgender, I still technically have a mental health issue. And so, I know. So disability organizations have been trying to reach out to the trans community because they found a loophole to help trans people because of a mental health illness. And that's something we're working with Parliament at the moment to go and turn around. But it's really sad that we're actually being pushed to a place that because you have a disability.
Okay, so I want to ask this question to one more person. I realize that I'm just going way over the time allotment for this question, but I just really like these stories. I think that they're really informative. They set the next question well. So the last person I want to ask this question, one second, I've misspelled your name here. I've written Christy, but Kruti.
Yeah.
I'm terrible. Sorry about that, Kruti. So the question again is like, at what point in your life did this discussion become particularly meaningful?
Yeah, mine is a very different one
Yeah.
because I worked in India for about 7 years before I moved to Australia, and India is very diverse country in terms of women versus men in technology, and even I know a lot of my friends who are disabled and all, but they are still in one team. So for me, when I moved over here, wherever I went for interview, there were two major issues I faced. One of them was me being Indian. Back in India, I never talked in English before. So when I moved over here, it was really different language for me, and it was hard for me to talk in English at that time. And at the same time, I was a woman in technology who was a programmer, so which was very unusual over here for people. So they kept on, every interview I go, they used to ask me, how come you are a programmer and a female? Like, that's very unusual combination. And I was like, it's not true that beauty doesn't have brains, beauty can have. But yeah, so even I went for one of the big four, and I was rejected with the reason that I'm not culturally fit for the company. And the reason was, I believe that maybe because I didn't have pretty strong language control, as well as I didn't have a local experience. So yeah, that's what triggered me that there is something wrong. There is something which is missing about. There were two fights I was fighting, honestly. Being a female in technology and at the same time Indian girl in technology. So I went and did too much hard work. Like, I had two mentors who helped me a lot and learned English and went for public speaking, because there were not many women and not many Indian people talking publicly about technology. And that's how I got into this. I was dragged into this. I had no idea before that there is a thing called, there is an issue we have, which is diversity. So, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, one thing that occurs to me hearing all these stories is that this is a perfect illustration of what we mean by like intersectional praxis. All of you have something different to bring to the table, and your experience of the world differs because of those differences. And so I'm glad that you're all here to be able to tell those stories. So moving on to the next bit, kind of want to understand where people are on when specifically the tech sector began grappling with this issue, according to your memory of it. So I'm going to give this one to Brendan. When did we all really get serious about this, or are we even that serious yet? Just tell me what you think.
Honestly, I think the tech industry and startup community in particular has always had diversity at its roots, because diversity in its roots has always just been difference. It's been challenging the status quo. You look at the people that have created some amazing technology. They did that by pushing the social boundaries, by pushing the professional boundaries. And so I think the idea of diversity, at least on that sort of technical and perhaps intellectual level, has always been there. I think that's just the nature of what's been a big part of it. And I think the shift has been more applying that on the more softer and the emotional side. And I think making that transition has been difficult, as it is across all communities, but it's much more, I think, quite seamless, because the tech community has already been different, so it's just adding another layer of difference. It's just adding those sort of stepping stones. And so I think it's started getting some serious traction probably as a result of technology being much more accessible to lots of different people, because people are taking it more personally. It's much more relatable, and so that, I think, puts people on the back foot initially, but at the same time it encourages them in the way forward. And I think in particular for the mental health side of things, so many organisations are realising, okay, that, you know, a kid with Asperger's, I want someone that is bloody literal. You know, I want someone that can do the code exactly, and so it's an advantage. Or, you know, human-centered design. I want the kid with depression because then they can empathise, and that's what you want. You know, human-centered design. It's about empathy. It's about understanding how people are going to be using technology. So it's an asset. And one last example, I guess, on that is the anxiety side of things. That you need someone that can generate lots and lots of ideas like that. And yes, a lot of them might not be great, but that's not really the point. It's the generating the ideas. It's being able to think up angles and perspectives that you might not necessarily have thought of originally. So I think diversity has always been a very big part of technology. It's just ingrained in what it's been doing. You know, you think of that old quote that I think is attributed to Henry Ford, that if you'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so he's just pushed the boundary. He pushed that social, that technological, that professional envelope to a degree that benefits so many more people. And with that benefit, people start seeing the positives. And when people start seeing the positives, it starts being quite normalised. And I think everyone here, that normalising that difference is very, very important for pushing it forward, if that makes sense. So I think...
I'd have to say, what I've seen in the diversity space when it comes to tech, what I have found is it's environments like this, the digital space. The digital space is changing. There's different startups popping up, the different little companies popping up. This room alone is very diverse. Step outside these new startups. Start outside some of these more established organizations, maybe even get down to your hardware level of things, okay? I regularly deal with Toll, for example. Toll have techs that actually out on the road, replacing and doing parts for, say, a machine inside McDonald's, an ATM machine, FPOS machines, hardware that's actually going on out there. Everybody I deal with is a male. Very few of them, I'd say, are beyond white, and I maybe deal with like 1 or 2 women, okay? This environment is unique compared to what I've seen over the years. And I do believe that there is change. We can go and see gamers and coders that are young women, young children, everything, because it's at home. You can do it and do it in your own bedroom, do whatever, and learn and train yourself and whatever. But those of us who have a screwdriver, replace that motherboard or whatever we want to do inside that laptop, there's very little diversity out there beyond this space. So if you're going to see a guy come in here and replace any of these system boards inside these machines, I'll guarantee you it's almost going to be a male walking in the door. And so that's the other side of this coin, that you don't see that change. Yeah. And a lot of the guys I've had to deal with, I don't know if anybody else has dealt with this, but I've dealt with homophobia. I've dealt with very racist, everything kind of attitudes that are out there. So there are two sides to the tech industry that we need to make sure we're discussing in this one here.
I think it's interesting. I mean, what I'm picking up is that there is definitely something sort of progressive and malleable about tech as an industry, and yet the material change has been much slower than we've. So there's something inherent in terms of potential, but that potential isn't yet realized in the way that we see. So that actually dovetails into the next question quite perfectly, which I want to give to Lama, which is, you know, as far as you're aware, like what types of initiatives have been rolled out in our sector in particular, and how have they succeeded or failed in broad terms?
Sure. So I'll draw upon my personal experience and my journey in the tech industry as a female, but then I'd like to everyone join my story beyond the gender piece. My career, I've always worked for global international companies. So by default, we're all diverse because we're all different. The business that we've done were in international markets. So to your piece, we've worked with India, we've worked with the US, we've worked in Japan, we've worked in the Middle East. So all my co-workers, my colleagues and my peers from the leadership team, senior management, the engineers in R&D, we are a reflection of our clients, our customers, our consultants, our vendors, and that made a great business strategy. It fed our business growth. So by default, all those companies, what do they have in common is inclusion. They led by inclusion rather than diversity piece. Having said that though, and listening to all the conversations and the topics that we just touched upon, and one thing that resonated with me just out of this conversation, what you guys have said with cultural fit, 3 of the speakers have actually mentioned that. In my view, I think cultural fit, that word, should be taken out of the HR vocabulary. It's very alienating. It's very biased. You're automatically excluding a huge chunk of people based on skill, based on experience and expertise, simply because of your own personal biases as a recruiter. So which brings me to the important point that I think everyone in this room does very well, which is we are all very aware of our own personal biases, because we all have them. We're all different. That's human. But at the end of the day, if we acknowledge our differences, put that aside, become aware of our own personal biases, not let that influence our decision, that's a good start. So to your point, in terms of what fails and what worked really well, there's a lot of programs that work really well, but then we have to start thinking long-term rather than tactical. Tactical, let's get more females working on code. Let's get more females doing this. It goes beyond the gender. I mean, at the end of the day, I love the onion analogy, because an onion has different layers. Not that I'm much of a foodie, but putting that aside, I think 2 things why a lot of the programs fail. While there's a lot to succeed, I'd like to touch on the failure piece. Diversity and inclusion initiatives and programs are not a one-size-fits-all. We're all very different. So think from an artistic perspective. Think of a mosaic. We're all individuals. Let's take all these pieces with people, different skill sets, different abilities. That would fuel the innovation within a business. Technology is innovation. You've touched on as well on when that dialogue started. It's always been there. Technology is always evolving. So diversity and inclusion will always evolve. We have to have that mindset in our culture, outside the organization, inside the organization. Number 2, why a lot of the programs fail, is often the diversity and inclusion program drivers, designers, and people who instigate this sit in the HR department. That piece has to be in the center of the organization, and it has to be an active task force, let's say, because at the end of the day, diversity and inclusion has to be visible in the C-suite, leadership team, managerial, senior management, consultancy, engineering, factory, you name it. It's across the entire organization. So that mindset has to shift, and it has to be visible as a task force in every organization. So I hope I kind of gave a bit of a flavor there.
So on that last point, I saw you were like, I just want to know what that was.
Yeah, oh, well, so many times with diversity initiatives, we see it being handed to HR or to a diversity manager, and the executive sort of goes, okay, diversity is your responsibility, go do stuff to make us diverse. Well, that's not the case. What needs to happen is every single manager, leader needs to be involved in the discussion, and it needs to be part of everyday culture and being brought to the table all the time. So we know of some companies where it works really well. They make a point of, in their weekly meetings, they talk about it in every single weekly meeting. With things like unconscious bias training, so many companies will just do like one session and be like, oh, we rolled it out, and then everyone goes, yeah, that's great, and they walk away, and then you forget it. Just like these inspirational talks that you go to, you feel so pumped up, and then you walk away and it's like sort of gone and you forget it. just like unconscious bias training. So it's one of those things that needs to be constantly reinforced and really embedded into the company, and making sure that the leadership teams have it at a minimum and the recruitment teams have it at a minimum. But really, everybody should be undergoing this sort of awareness and training, I think. Yeah.
I think the point about leadership being the minimum almost bears a little bit more sort of elaboration, because of course, as someone who has worked as an engineer and then as like a sort of middle manager, of course I've always had that sort of mission in my heart, but looking around, like up in particular, you see it lacking, and therefore it sort of really diminishes the amount or the effectiveness of whatever you might be thinking and wanting to do. So I'm curious, like, if it's a totally comprehensive strategy of educating the company at every level, is anyone aware of this actually being done or succeeding? Because I've definitely heard of like unconscious bias training and things that have been done once or twice a year, but what you're kind of describing is a really comprehensive program.
So look, I don't know if it was a comprehensive program, but speaking on personal experience, so that job that I was talking about with the recruiter in the beginning was with one of the Big Four. And I got the job, and my management team at the time were so accommodating of anything that I needed. Not that I needed much, but they're always asking, is the desk the right height, or can we do something with the seating or the lighting or whatever else. And then so that was the first sort of 2 or 3 years of the job, and then the leadership changed, and I thought, all right, here we go, we're gonna have to start all over again with all the questions and all this stuff. But that didn't happen, because I just went from one really good set of leaders to another really good set of leaders, and almost 9 years later, I'm still there going, well, it's pretty cool. So whether it was something that they consciously tried to do as a program, I don't know, but whatever they were doing seems to have worked.
Thank you. So actually, I just want to roll. So I've got one final question on the subject, and I want to ask every single one of these. So we're going to go on a line and start with you, Gemma, which is just sort of given what we have discussed so far, that every single person is experiencing the sort of, I guess, the lack of sort of skilled inclusion practices broadly, and how it's different. Sort of like, what would you actually specifically, what would you put forward as an initiative that you think like people here could potentially take away and discuss in their own companies?
There are so many. I think making things gender neutral is probably one of the biggest things that we see. So when I say that, we're talking about gender neutral flexibility, gender neutral parental leave, and things like that. Because if we make it, okay for the 40-year-old white male to be able to do these things, it definitely seeps down to the rest. I know that there's one tech company, I think it's Zendesk, they actually had more men on parental leave than they did women, which was, really, really impressive to us. You need men to be, primary carers essentially to make it equal for women in the workforce. So that's my one thing, gender neutrality with all this.
One of my favorite sayings when I go to a company is to remind people that culture eats policy for breakfast. You can go to a company, and every company can go on social media, go on your internet, and talk about all the great things we've done. Yeah, we've got the Working Woman of the Year. Yeah, we've done this as well, and we toot our horn. But when you can see what Adam's done, where he's gone from one department to another, the culture is different in each department. And so what we need to do is make sure that we are doing training from the top down, giving our leaders who are running and managing people and teaching them what you just said, gender equality or gender neutrality, both for men and women in this case is when it comes to like child leave and parental leave and et cetera. But making sure that the leaders are trained on things like gender neutrality for pronouns, or how to actually introduce a new employee who is, say, transgender, or just helping just set the example for their entire team. So making sure the culture for each different area within your organization is the same.
For me, it's the conversation has always been around that it's an add-on. Companies making money, and that diversity is just an add-on to that. That you have the diversity policies, and that's just an attachment. It's not an equal part of the business. And I think embedding it, as you were saying before, is creating it to just putting it in the operations, that the social side, the diversity side, has an equal say, as well as the economic side, as well as the environmental side, that they're equally weighed. It's not something that someone goes, oh God, it's 4:45 and now I get the diversity email. It should just be part of their work. It's not something that, in my opinion anyway, needs to be separated in that sense, that it's just pull it back as part of the business. And I think that's one of the strong advantages to tech and startups, is that you have the opportunity to do that at such an early stage, that you can do that instantly, whereas some of the larger organisations, doing that is something that does require a lot of time, and it's definitely something that, as we've heard, a lot more organisations are doing, but it's not a quick fix. And I think tech and startups, there is that opportunity to embed it early on and create that change so just really early on. So just not seeing it as an add-on.
It's interesting. Big organizations have much more inertia, right? Harder to push them in a direction.
Hard, but not impossible.
Not impossible. I like that. It's true.
So we say diversity and inclusion. I like to say inclusion first, because if you lead with inclusion, diversity happens automatically. I like to everyone think of how we kind of position those two words. Look at us in this room, look at us on this panel. We are Code for Australia have done a great job in including all of us up here. And the vantage points and experience have been very different. So we've offered you a diverse conversation. So if businesses apply that simple analogy within the different departments, within the different divisions, that would be a good start. Again, bias education, even if you don't have it, you being self-aware of your own, that's a great start. I think it's a simple, mindful act. We can all have control over that. And then at the end of the day, innovation is technology and vice versa. We live in a day and age that business is no longer defining the individual. Now, whether you are a recruiter or seeking work, it's all about the individuals defining the business. So human capital, social capital is a huge currency. So everyone can be an agent for change and driving change.
So just before I move on, I want to elaborate on what Tara asked about. But the words have escaped me, so we are going to.
I just mentioned about the bias that you mentioned. So you can actually do an online test. It's the Harvard implicit bias test. If you Google it, it's free online, and there's a couple of others as well, and it is so interesting, and I did them, and I was just horrified by bias against women when that's all I'm saying. So I highly encourage you to do that and share it as well with others.
So actually, that was my question. Thank you. I wanted to ask the audience: have people here had bias training? A show of hands would be interesting. Right. Okay. So even attendees to a diversity panel, I think less than 50%. This is precisely what I was talking about. I would love people to go away and go, hey, that's actually something that I could do. So I think that's a really great. And I think that some companies will sort of provide it, subsidize the cost, and introduce it as a program. Some won't. If your company does, obviously probably try and expand that and get your friends to come. And if it doesn't, then agitate until it happens. But yeah, so Kruti.
I have two things. One is tackling at the very early age. So basically, when I believe all of us will have kids at one other point in our lives, and when our kids have any problems or they raise questions, whether it is a girl or a disabled kid or have some anxiety issues or whatever it is, if they want to do something, give them wings to fly and do whatever they want to do, because unless and until they try, they won't know whether they want to do it in future or not. That's first thing. And that's I'm coming from is because I am in my company's recruitment team as well, and it's really hard to get. I talk about females, and because there are not many there who wants to get into STEM basically, and that's because we have not been educated that way, or we have not been taught or given access of technology at our early age like boys would have got. And that's just one basic example. But so first is giving wings to your kids and the kids maybe. And the second is I have noticed that in many companies, whenever they talk about diversity, it's just based on the gender or something very narrow. Diversity is like 7 to 8 types of diversity, and what I feel is a place will be diverse when you personally feel that, hey, that guy said something to that guy which was not genuine, and you just raise it and create awareness to that person as well. It's not necessary you be self-aware, but it's also important when something is wrong, you say it politely and raise it that, hey, I think so this should have been said in a gentle way with a different tone, and that brings someone else think about it, that, oh yeah, that actually that person is right, and we can indirectly be nice with each other and learn from each other. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just want to pick up that first point real quick and put it to anyone who has a thought here, which is, Ramar was mentioning that the scope and sort of remit of the tech industry to do something in this problem space is limited, and as you just pointed out, education, well, I mean, like, if we had a panelist of teachers, then I'm sure it would be, oh, yeah, okay, there you go. It would be a whole different perspective. So I guess my question is, as a tech industry, you've seen how well it's able to organize when, like, for example, changes to the 457 visa are introduced, and all of a sudden every CEO is like, hey, wait a second, like, that's going to dry up our supply of, like, candidates for these roles. I'm just curious, is the tech industry particularly well organized around influencing education?
It is,
Good.
and it's not.
It is, it's not.
It's both.
Not surprised.
It's both. So you can influence the education, because I think at the end of the day, we live in a day and age, we actually can choose to be informed. So you don't actually need a particular body to sort of seek the knowledge. But in the context of an organization, to your question, so you're asking basically if the tech industry has got that responsibility solely? No. Because that responsibility is to the organization, to the culture, and the individuals within the organization. But for any change, in my personal view and my personal experience, doesn't happen in the middle of the organization, nor the people who are affected with those issues. It starts from the top. To have any education, any awareness to any issue, you have to get all the parts within the organization sitting on the same table. Like co-designing technology. Think of UX, CX. We do, like, the experience to design technology. Think about it the same way. When you design an educational program to drive more females in technology, or to get more diverse, inclusive workforce in the technology, whether it's female or male, or not gender specific, let's not be. So at the end of the day, that piece of co-designing, I think that's where the education piece has to come in to be more inclusive.
I'd sort of build on that a little bit further and say that it needs to get, like, we know that technology is influencing so many different parts of our society, like, we know that, and it is about then attaching it to all the different sort of parts of education. I know from my own academic background of accounting and history, I had no IT subjects at all except for the ones that I took as electives. And then if you go back much further than I like to admit, back at high school, the same sort of thing. It was just like, you can use a computer to do your assignment. There wasn't that level of, I guess, respect, for lack of a better word, around it. And I think once that starts happening, when it starts being shown that it is positively pervasive and spread throughout lots of different parts of society, then that education just flows on naturally, because people see it as just another part of what they're doing or what they're achieving. In the work environment, you call up IT because a lot of people don't have that sort of technological literacy. And I think the more that you empower people to be aware of that, the greater the responsibility and the greater influence that it will have on the education, because it's getting that respect back. So.
Well, so Adam, you're the last to answer the question of what specific initiatives do you think would put forward, and then after that, all of you will have a chance to ask some questions for panelists as well.
So I think in terms of initiatives, I think we need to stop looking at the conversation in terms of diversity, right? Because I look at that and go, all right, so we want diversity, but in doing that, we're putting people into boxes. You've got, people with disabilities, you've got people from diverse backgrounds, and that's a diversity makeup. Instead, we need to be having the inclusion conversation, right? It's about how do we include people in organisations, in universities, in all aspects of sort of everyday life from a technology perspective. If I look at it from the university perspective, there's probably one university course that I know of that includes accessibility as any part of their curriculum. And then there's a dedicated professional certificate on accessibility. So when you look at that and you go, well, all right, accessibility is pretty big in technology these days, and it's getting bigger, but you look at the educational institutions that are teaching the next round of designers, developers, UX people, and not one of those courses includes accessibility. So, there's got to be a change there from an education perspective. And I think it's less about having that diversity conversation and more about talking about how we include people across the board.
Really pleased to hear that everyone more or less agrees on that, because I have been thinking that for some time. So just to really quick sort of summarize what we heard, and then open the floor to questions. There were a couple of people making the point that the business should be reframing the discussion around practice of inclusion rather than just diversity, because diversity alone doesn't really seem to suggest a lot of specific pathways to accomplish diversity, not always at least. And some of them are very interesting. So your observations are that it absolutely has to occur at every level of the organization, but then leadership is a bare minimum. If it's not at the top, then how are you really going to succeed if the signals aren't coming down from leadership? I actually thought that the thing about more gender neutral policies was very interesting. I wonder how, because that's something that I think that almost anyone you could take a look at your policy documents and determine how far along you are or not. It wouldn't be too hard. Things like leave, restrooms, etc., pronoun training, I would hope would be part of the sort of unconscious bias training, etc. There's so many different things to go through. There was the mention of tech education from an early age. But I just want to come back to the main point that I heard everyone talk about, which I thought was just so beautiful. There is something inherent and malleable and sort of progressive about technology. It's, as you said, like it is progress in its very nature. And so it doesn't surprise me, particularly that this industry is one of the leading industries in terms of this discussion. And I think that my worry has been that the conversation is stagnated because we haven't really seen the sort of progress that we had hoped for. But maybe that just means that we have to reframe the conversation, and I hear everyone talking about that, so that's just so wonderful. So yeah, audience, we have a wonderful panel up here, and we've got about, I'm just going to say, do people mind if we add an extra 10 minutes to this section? All right, so let's do 20 minutes. And let's see show of hands. Who wants to ask a question?
Hi. In terms of diversity and enacting change, I think tonight's audience was probably preaching to the converted, correct? They've been attracted to this talk because we really believe in diversity. How do you approach this conversation with people who
Good question.
aren't that way inclined?
You've got to bring it back really to facts and data and show, things like productivity, profitability. A good example of that was a Deloitte report that came out around the Queensland government, which showed if they got 50-50 gender balance on their boards, it would actually equate to $81 million a year in productivity gains for the state. So it's really bringing it back to facts and figures, because obviously those people don't quite have that emotional connection.
So was your question to how do you bring that conversation internally within your organisation? So one of the things, for example, I would suggest you do is do you have a diversity and inclusion program person in your organisation?
Currently, I work for myself, so I'm pretty very diverse.
Well, you're that too.
So I have worked in big companies where I guess the cultural trickle down has been a big problem, and it's daunting. As I think that's that feeling as one person, what can I do to change a culture?
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, where the question is stemmed from.
Okay, so the culture piece is a huge, like, technically inclusion and diversity should be in every single DNA of any business, is how I personally view it, and that's the reality of our future. We're in 2017, we've always been different as human beings, of all abilities, of all expertise, so that's an issue that's only going to evolve as technology evolves and as the business evolves, and as our future evolves, pretty much. But to your question, one thing I suggest is basically to follow through onto the data and information, is to start questioning that. One thing that programs I personally feel that is lacking is visibility and transparency. Like, there is data out there, however, we do have a lot of big data talk, because it's a buzzword. But if you check those, like, simply ask, what are those layers of those data? Where did this data come from? How old is this data? Start questioning that, and there's a lot of great organizations, check Project Include. They actually sign a lot of organizations up to actually come forth and publish that data. One great company that does that very well is Slack. Every year they publish their reports, and I think that's best practice. A lot of companies should do that. So you can easily ask for that type of research. It should be readily available to everyone, and that should be public information, not just based on the gender, but on all the other data that you want to find out more information on.
Michelle?
Usually when a company approaches me, like you were mentioning, first thing I want to say is, what is it you're trying to do with your diversity and inclusion? Where's your focus? Okay? I just sit down with a client and say, okay, you're trying to develop more of a diverse and inclusive program with some people. Well, what are you trying to focus on? Are you trying to focus on, okay, I know somebody in the organization is going through transition, and I see that we can't do it. Or, I'm the only woman here, how do I include more women? It's trying to understand where your kind of focus is first, and kind of go from there. A lot of times, you need to have a company like myself or diversity to come in, and we can sit down and help maybe develop that program with you. And but it just depends on where your focus is on it. But again, a lot of it's going to come from the top down. And then going to the people, maybe head of HR or the head of, say, the organization, saying, look, I had this amazing conversation, and I want to get this going, I want to get this conversation going, but not so much as the trendy thing of we need to go and show off what we're doing, but actually developing it from the top down.
Questions?
No question. So, I guess, how do you bring up something like diversity and inclusion in an interview? Like, the experience I've had before is something like, oh, you know, we value women, like we have a flexible schedule, and it's like, oh, okay, great. So you're saying I can arrive late and leave later? Like, that's not a program, and it's hard. I guess I've struggled to decide in my brain if I manage to bring it up, which is already quite difficult, because, you know, I'm like, for example, like I'm 30, I don't want to say like, oh, you know, like, what's up for women, because then they're going to be like, oh, she's going to go get pregnant.
I have a great answer for you. So I'm actually a co-founder of a job platform called Diversity Careers, and we pre-screen organisations before they advertise on their policies and initiatives around supporting women. So we measure about 20 questions, which are based off consultation with job seekers, academics, reviewing literally hundreds of company policies, and we turn down around 10% of companies who apply to advertise with us. Now, on our website, there's a best employers page, and you can actually click on, say, for instance, CBA, and you can read all about CBA's policies. You can see their flexibility, you can see how many weeks parental leave they have, do they have different women's networking groups and things like that. So there's one thing that you can do the research prior, and also there's also the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. So that's a federal government agency, and every year companies with over 100 employees who are in the private sector have to report on their gender equality. If they reach a certain level, they get a citation. There are only 106 companies in Australia that currently hold the citation for being gender equality by WGA standards, so it's extremely low. There's also things like the Equal Pay Ambassador list that you can look at, which I think is another really important topic that we haven't really raised on today, but the pay gap. And we've seen lots of companies like QIC, for instance, they identified a pay gap within their organisation, and within 12 months, they actually stopped all pay rises for that year. So, you know, it would have pissed a few people off not getting a pay rise, but they fixed the women's salary so that they were actually then equal to the men. So it's a really bold move, and we see lots of companies doing things like that. But I think the ones that are serious about it, you can do research. Yeah.
And I'm going to add on to that as well. That when you're going for a job interview, you're there interviewing them as well. And they're well aware of that. Most of the time I deal with people who are looking for a job, or even when I've dealt with recruiters in the back, go, well, who do you want to work for? Well, I'm a bit old school. Like, I'm just turning 40. So I remember when I first interviewed going, I want to be this. They're like, well, who do you want to work for? No, but I want to be this. Who do you want to work for? And so if they can't actually tell you what she just said, then they're not the place to be. Other than looking at the list and doing your homework yourself, you're interviewing them just as much. So you can walk in and say, do I want to work for you? Tell me more about you. And if they can't, well then, next.
I've got an absolute example of that. I actually made it through to the final interview for the job, and then just too many red flags because they couldn't actually answer any of my questions around diversity. So I was just like, this is not a company I want to be part of. If they're dodging bullets so blatantly, that's not an organisation I want to be part of. And I know it's hard looking for work out there, and so I can understand that there are times that you might want to just bite the bullet, but just be aware of what things you are willing to, I guess, put up with, and what ones you can't. Like, what is the leeway, and where are you looking to, or what are you looking to get out of the job? Is this something that you want to do for the next 15 years, or is this something that you want to do 3 to 5 years, and just what you're looking to get out of it in that way? But yeah, absolutely, you're interviewing them just as much, and that's why they say, do you have any questions? They wouldn't ask that just out of politeness. They genuinely want you to make sure that you're a good fit for them. They're a good fit for you as much as you're a good fit for them. Using, seems to be the slogan of the
In saying
day.
that, you wouldn't want to walk in and be like, what's your parental leave policy?
You've got to be diplomatic about
Doesn't
it.
apply straight away.
So if I get the job, can I go on holiday?
But to that point, though, you've touched on something with the age element. So that's another unconscious bias as well. That's something that would exclude you automatically. So to what you said, just ask them. I mean, you've reframed in an articulate way because it has to match your values too. Because you got to, coexist in that culture. So if you're unhappy, you can't deliver. It's not going to be a great experience. So you've got nothing to lose with asking.
I think so. At the same time, I think so companies have to be self-aware as well. So whoever goes into the interview to interview the person, they have to, the team has to be very diverse in a way as well. Like I have been to a few interviews where there were just a couple of dudes in front of me, and I wasn't comfortable being there because after I joined that company as well, they were all guys, and I was not comfortable about it. So it's just that if a company is more conscious and you already have a female, male developer or anyone, and just bring them in that interview as well, that indirectly comforts that opposite person that, yeah, this is the company I want to work with as well.
So when I'm even interviewing companies that I deal with, and when I sit down and interview them, I want to see their team when I sit with them. I want to see, okay, so you're sitting there with me with a bunch of dudes, or if you're sitting there with a bunch of white cisgendered women who are heterosexual, I'm going to go, okay, well, you're coming to me to talk about LGBT issues and how you want to help approach this. Do you have someone who's queer? Do you have someone who's a lesbian? Do you have someone who's gay? Do you have someone who's trans? Do you have someone who's Aboriginal? Show me the diversity within your human resources department or even your management team. And we'll start there. And we're the same. We have a list of criteria based on different rainbow ticks and pride and diversity ticks and all these other different ticks that we go by, that we hold as values, that if I were to bring someone in who's very sensitive as a trans person to work here, could you handle it? What would you do? What are your toilets? Like, I want to make sure you meet what I'm going to do.
So I'll take another question real quick, but first I just want to add my 2 cents as a person who was a recruiter for 2.5 years, and I answered that question a few times. And a lot of people, the question was like, how can I tell if what they're saying is true? Because oftentimes, like in an interview setting, most people will roll out some fluff piece about, like, oh yeah, we're committed to it. And if their answer is in essence like, yeah, it's the vibe, then you know it's not enough, right? Because, right, you want to know about their policies, and you also want to know about, like, to an earlier point about like how well has an education program been rolled out in this kind of organization. It should be obvious to you when you ask their HR person to talk about it. You know what I mean? And also there are other indicators, like, for example, what does their leadership group look like? So, do you have a point here that you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
It's sort of just building on that, and you can reach out to people within the organisation and get their insights. Like, ask them, and then you can start spotting disparities if they show up in the interview. Like, you can ask the same question, and then if you get 2 very different or 3 very different responses, then it's a bit of a something's a little bit amiss here, and you might want to dig a little deeper. But you know, alumni networks through universities and things are a great place to start for that, and just talking to people from these organisations, having a coffee with them, and just getting those nuggets of wisdom that might end up helping you in the interview as well. Like, I know this person that they were actually part of the diversity committee. I'm quite privileged that I mentor from previous workplace, and she heads up the diversity committee at her organisation, as well as her normal duties, and she's on the board of a non-profit around diversity as well. So you can, you know, you never know who you can meet up with and get those insights.
Any other question for the audience? Yes.
So we've got a diversity and inclusion working group at my organisation, and they're doing some good stuff. But they're essentially looking at around gender is the primary one. I guess it's the obvious one. I work in an engineering type energy company, so generational and ethnicities, so the 3 obvious ones. And I'm sort of aware that by focusing on those 3 things, we're actually excluding other things like mental health and LGBT, but those conversations are probably a little bit harder to approach or have people come out and want to advocate for them or discuss them, because I mean, it's just a bit more of a sensitive topic. So I just wonder if you have any.
Still a bias.
Yeah.
That coming out is, especially in an industry setting like you're talking, is. Let me explain this. I get done having a conversation with CUB, okay, and they have one of their facilities down in South Australia, very blocky, very blue collar. Can you imagine having a conversation around homophobia? Inclusion with LGBTI, you know, the amount of things you're going to be getting going, oh, mate, you know, the things you're going to hear from them, right? Especially when it comes to, you know, being trans and coming out, like, how do you actually deliver that in a workplace? And I find that a lot of places honestly really want to help, really whatever. This is the conversation I try to explain to trans people as well, is most of these organizations actually are inclusive. They really want to help and actually try to put together a program, but they don't know what to ask. And that's where, say, we come along with LGBTI jobs, because I'm like one of the only trans women I know of who actually get on stage and say words like tranny and all kinds of other stuff. And the whole room goes, I can't believe she said that. And I'm going, well, I'm owning it and I'm taking it back. So, and I like to have a little bit of fun with it. And I actually had, at the end of it, I had a big burly bloke come up to me, and he goes, oh, man, I love your tattoos. Oh, what's that one for? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and this guy's massive. And it just was a great back and forth. And that's where we need to get away from being so uptight and just have a bit more real conversation. We've gotten too far PC, I think, and we need to come a bit back. And that's why I say, look, ask me any question. Ask me anything you want to ask me. You know? Like, I've always wanted to know this about trans. Well, ask. And I think we need to kind of get a bit better with this. You know, I think right now we're so worried about, because I think in our language we're like, oh, so where are you from? Immediately, everyone responds and says, by saying to her, where are you from? It says, you don't belong here. But that's how far left we've gotten. And I'm trying to bring it back and saying, hey, let's just get down to having a conversation. Sometimes that's what you need to do in your diversity inclusion areas, is just have the conversation. You know, don't worry so much about, you know, if you're in a diverse inclusion area, you're probably going to know your people. And so that's why the best thing is having that basic conversation and reaching out to different groups that say, can I ask you questions? If they can't answer the questions you want to ask, then move on. Find the next group.
Addon, you had a point here?
Yeah, so I think it's the same from a disability perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've got a prop with me pretty much everywhere I go, right? It's there, I take it with me. I wheel into a meeting and go, oh, look, there's not enough chairs for everybody, but I bought my own.
I love it.
And, you know, and the first time people hear me say that, they're like, oh, wait, am I allowed to laugh? Or what's the, you know, but it does kind of, it breaks the ice. Yeah. And then you start having that conversation and you start trying to relate it to things that are happening in those people's everyday lives. So they could have a parent that's getting older, grandparent, whatever, you know, vision declines, hearing declines, all that sort of stuff as you age. And if you can make that personal connection, it makes it a lot easier to have some of those conversations that otherwise you'd kind of go, well, how do I ask that, or how do I relate to what that person's going through and that sort of stuff. So yeah, absolutely, just sort of have the conversation. Don't be scared of sort of asking the question.
It's sort of like assuming a culling effect. You're assuming that they can't look after themselves, and it is like it's that apprehension. I think challenging that is one of the hardest things that you'll have to do, but it makes sense. You know, you don't have to assume that they can't take a joke. And, you know, everyone here is saying that they're just a human being. What we have is not our defining characteristic. It is just like, as much as we like coffee or the doors, it's another part of who we are. It's not anything more or anything less. It's just another part of us.
But if you look at the LGBT, most companies do like a blind statistics with their own organization, see who's LGBT, maybe trans. And most organizations don't even realize they have a trans person there. They actually do stats. They realize there's one person here in the company who's trans, but they don't give their name, they don't give nothing, because trans people are so worried about being cis. You don't know the word cis. It means that you identify as the gender you're born in. Okay? I'm trans, majority of you are cis, that I'm aware of. And then people probably say that's cis assumption, but I'm going to go in there. It snowballs. I'm sick of it. So anyway, so you'll find with your organization already people there, but people are too afraid. Yeah. And so I find that a lot of trans people are trying to find a job. They're too worried about, okay, I need to have my operation now. I need to have all these surgeries. I need this, and nobody absolutely knows. No one will know. And then I can get a job. And I'm like, man, you don't have to go and spend $150,000 to get all this done. Just walk on with your old passport and your old birth certificate, whatever. I'll tell you, they'll look after you. And there's just a fear.
So that actually will take us to the conclusion of this portion. I'd like everyone give an opportunity to everyone to come and chat with the panelists one-on-one. But I just thought I would make some closing remarks. So, first of all, wait. Can we have a round of applause? That was a really interesting discussion. And rather than maybe I'll try and summarize sort of the parts that really hit home for me. I mean, like, the courage that it takes to be part of this discussion in our own organizations is not to be understated. Like, this isn't easy work. And oftentimes really important things are risky and you do them anyway, right? So I appreciate, that last question in particular, recognizing that this isn't, just a matter of, kind of like saying the right words and having the right ideas. The practice of actually rolling this stuff out means that there's a lot of friction when you want to change a system, right? And so it's nice that, to your point, we may be preaching to the sort of converted with this audience. However, it still remains true that we need to seek each other's support for a very challenging and uphill battle, right? So there are definitely areas that we want to explore more. And in fact, the second whole aspect of the panel, which we really didn't have time for, is the intersectional aspects of inclusion. And there's still much, much more hidden within that topic alone. And it might be interesting to have another panel discussion just about that rather than just the practice of inclusion, because we, certainly within scope, we just don't have time. So the next panel, although it almost seems like that's what we should talk about, is about something else. It's about empathy in tech, although I suspect that these will all be related in one way or another. Right? So that's happening on the 10th of May. You can sign up on the Academy XI website, which I assume you went to sign up for this event, so you can go back there. Feel free to come chat to any of the team at Academy XI. So we have sorry, I can't remember, Frank. And then
I'm Joel.
Joel. So I'm from Code for Australia, Lena's from Code, and so is Grace. And, you know, thank you so much for coming. Thanks to the panelists for talking with us, and I hope that everyone is able to take a little nugget home and think about it and bring it to wherever you're going. Round of applause.